Well, first of all, welcome to the University of Illinois. Oh, goodness. I don't have a password. I just like to mention to each of you that you're in a location of a historic site at the University of Illinois. I don't know how many of you realize what was on this site, right here where this site. You remember? I know my brother, who's here, remembers what was on this site. This was a sheep barn. This is a sheep barn at this location. And for those of you who are staying in the hotel, you found in your room a little brochure about the research park, which this is a part of, the conference center, and about 180 acres that are back down here that was started 10 years ago, was just recognized by the association that works with research parks in the United States as the #1 research park of all of the public institutions in the United States. So we're very proud of that, and we're very proud to have you here. My role today is to look back. And after that last presentation where I felt like I was on a fire hose taking that information in, well, I'm going to give you a little break just for a few minutes to think back, particularly, Dr. Evans, to think back of what was going on in agriculture when you had the vision and dream about where AgCom could go in the future. So you'll bear with me. And I chose to say, let's look in the rearview mirror. And what I'm trying to do is to say, well, the young people in this room and those of you who are involved in ag communications are looking forward and trying to figure out how to deal with all that's coming. Every once in a while, developed by a future AgCom leader, and that's Amy Schaffelberger that's sitting over here. That happens to be my niece, my wife's husband's youngest daughter, who is a senior in AgCom at the University of Illinois. So I'm hopefully helping support those future AgCom leaders. As you look back to this stage of where we came from and what was going on with it, ag communications was part of a supply chain that really was almost an inverted pyramid. And granted, guys, you have a supply chain you're working with today, but it was a little different, and the mechanism of communication was a little different. The companies or connected distributors through ag retailers, all types of ag retailers. For example, in Purina, where I came from, there were 10,000 Purina dealers in the United States, and almost every town had a Purina dealer. Today, there aren't very many of those out there, and that's part of that change. But that whole system, that inverted pyramid, if you will, was trying to serve millions and millions and millions of farmers and help advance that communication of knowledge and technology. If you would just think back for a second, we've seen some numbers that take all the way out to 2050 a minute ago, but these are some specifics of 1960. Dr. Evans, when you and Hadley Reed were thinking about where do we go from here, there were 180 million people, there were 3.7 million farms, 8.3% of the U.S. employment was engaged in some direct or indirect result of agriculture. Average farms were 303 acres, which is bigger than I thought it was in 1960. There were about 900,000 dairy farmers, 600,000 swine producers, 1.5 million of beef cattle producers. And interestingly, the corn yield, Rob, was 55 bushels per acre, and soybean yield was 23 bushels per acre. Now, I assume it was a little bit better in Illinois, but that was the nation average. Today, or in 2010, there's 310 million people, 2.2 million farms, and remember the definition of farms in U.S. is not necessarily a fully productive farm. 1.2% of the labor force. It says the average acres are 430 as of 2010, but I don't think that reflects the number of acres that many farmers farm because of the amount that they own and farm together. 70,000 dairy producers. The top 25 swine producers produce 80% of the hogs in the United States. There's still about 1 million, where's Forrest? There's still about 1 million cattle producers out there. Corn yield, Rob, you've done well, 161 bushel. And I'm not shorting Pioneer's involvement in this also, I have to have dual time. And soybean yield to 42. And if you look at Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, obviously that performance is even better than that. Well, this is a look back. Now, I apologize. Amy and I had a hard time finding red and blue equipment to look at here. So, but this was a state-of-the-art planter, horn planter, in 1960. Matter of fact, you notice it didn't have only the seed, but also fertilizer being added with it. If you look back to that point in time and think about what was going on, just to remind you that the biggest tractor was usually less than 100 horsepower. All the tillage equipment could be traveled on any farm road without collapsing it. The planters and harvesters rarely exceeded 4 rows. Chemicals and seed were all sold in bags, not in other kinds of distributions, and fertilizer and pesticide was almost totally applied by ag retailers. Livestock production was much less concentrated, and livestock was for adding value to the grain produced or marketing the grain. That was really the purpose of livestock production in the country. Now, there was a big tractor in 1960. Typically at the same time that the marketing of the products from the farm was through grain elevators, through feed processors, livestock through stockyards or buying stations. Milk was going to local co-ops or some independent processors, egg marketers. The produce was going to produce marketers, in some cases actually directly to retail. This was a big combine harvester. But also back at that period of time, very little of the purchases or marketing was done with forward contracting. At that time, Dr. Tom Hieronymus, how many of you took grain marketing from T.A. Hieronymus? Hieronymus was trying to convince kids about how to forward price and forward market commodities, but very few farmers were buying forward, selling forward, or even thinking about the combination of putting a hedge together. When you look at ag communications, what was going on was to facilitate the transfer of product knowledge and production technology. It was face-to-face, it was on farms, it was in local meetings. Matter of fact, back when I started with Purina in sales, we used something called a ding machine. Anybody know what a ding machine was? It was a presentation and was on tape, and it had a ding every time you were supposed to advance the slide. That was in 1969, not just 1960. But that was what was going back on at that time in communication, and how, Dr. Evans, we were trying to communicate the innovation and technology was very, very different. As you look through the innovation and development, innovation came from land-grant colleges. It also came from companies. And the communication of that technology was going through 2 channels, one through the university extension representatives to the farmers, also through companies, through sales tech and support people to farmers. And sometimes they were in concert, and sometimes, Rob, they weren't necessarily in concert. But it was all the process of getting that technology transferred to it. Ag communications at that time was really much more simplistic. It was designed to encourage and reinforce product utilization. It was to provide programs and information to the farmers for implementing the products and technology. Communication was for products and programs that were nationwide. Very little differentiation of products to an individual farmer's needs. Matter of fact, if you think back to that point in time, the really only unique differentiation was in seed corn, which had the difference in growing seasons in the different growing areas throughout the United States. But most everything else was a nationwide product, and the challenge was how to adapt it to an individual producer's needs. Well, times have changed. My goodness, after that last presentation, I don't even tell you times have changed. But we need to learn from history of how agriculture has changed, and billion today, going to 8.3, that China and India are projected to be the big ones, and I think it was said that actually India will have more population than China by the time we get to at least 2050, which many times we don't think about that, and yet their needs and requirements, a big part of that's going to come back to the people that you serve domestically as well internationally. Global competitors are in all areas, and those of you who are in the companies in seed, chemical, animal health, implement manufacturing, grain and oilseed processing, and production animal, I don't have to remind you of that and how difficult it is for you to be a continuing leader globally. The half-life of technology, the examples that you gave this morning about how rapidly things are changing, we just can't fathom it, and yet you as communicators have to continually keep up with where that technology change is, and how do you help the companies you work with or the industries that you work with change that. I was going to add something to you. Here is the next largest computer that's going to be developed, called Blue Waters, and I'm sure if there's some university folks, our provost would be glad to talk to you about that. And I don't know where it measures on all those different quantifications, but it's supposed to be the next one in the world to take it to the next level of calculations. And I want to apologize for any of you whose business logo is not on here, because Amy and I tried to pick out every company that was here and talk about them being global agribusiness leaders, and I know that some of you are here that aren't, so I apologize, but this is just an example in this country of not only the countries that have been the innovators over the last 50 years, but are part of being the innovators going forward. As you look at the producers, you think about the challenges they face and what they're looking to. They're consolidating, they're becoming more technically competent because they have to compete and succeed, whether it's in big dairies, whether it's in grain development, whether it's in swine and poultry and production, whether it's in produce and produce production globally, or, I put this to compare to that planner that I put back on that was in 1960. This is, I assume, is the state of an art. It happens to be green, and it talks about how that technology implementation is going forward. Well, to me, Dr. Evans and all of the folks who were in the process of dreaming and creating a vision for communication back then, I don't think you quite saw where it was going, but you saw the need for what communications can and should do. For all of you here, and I know many of you are part of the pioneers that created what ag communication is today, and unfortunately for a lot of people that aren't, have created the legacy for the young people that are here. For the young people that are here, and it's so great to see all the bright faces that are out here, you have the challenge of taking it forward. And we're really pleased that we can celebrate the history and celebrate the success, but at the same time arm you with the support you need. And on behalf of the University of Illinois, we are so pleased to have you here. We're so pleased that Ag Communications has historically been a strength of the University of Illinois. And I look forward to hearing what these two guys are going to talk about where it's going in the future. Thank you.